Good evening, everybody. My name is Patrick Fisher. I'm the Executive Director of Erie Arts and Culture. I appreciate you all joining us this evening to learn more about creating with community and how it is being paired with the City of Erie's active transportation plan, known as Active Erie. We are recording this evening's session so that we can make the video available to those who are unable to attend us live in real time this evening. This will be posted both to Erie Arts and Culture's website as well as to social media afterwards. Frank, I'm going to ask that you please make me the co host again. I switched the host function over to you, but if you could please make me a co host so that I have the ability to share my screen. Thank
I,
you.
I actually just made you the host again. What we thought might work isn't going to work, so we'll just have to record it.
That's fine. Thank you. So we have a great turnout. There's a mix of both faces I recognize as well as some new faces to us, which is always wonderful to see. We'll start by jumping into what is creating with community, and then we will progress into handing it over to the city so that the city can talk about the active Erie plan. Creating with Community started as a pilot program in 2020 with funding from Erie Insurance and the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development through the Neighborhood Assistance Program. And with that program in its pilot year, we had funding to provide paid opportunities to 14 artists in the Erie community. And the objective was to pair together two artists from two different artistic disciplines, preferably two artists that had never collaborated before together, and then partner them with the Community Development Corporation, specifically either our West Bayfront, Serve Erie, the Bayfront East Side Task Force, or the Sisters of St. Joseph's Neighborhood Network. The objective of that project was to leverage artists' unique skill sets to both raise awareness of community issues or aspirations and then develop creative solutions to either resolve those issues or creative projects that can emphasize the aspirations. And we had 14 artists that went through the program last year. Some of them are in this call this evening. And, you know, for it being a pilot program last year, we learned a lot, especially because the pilot program launched in the middle of a public health pandemic. One example of a project that came out of last year's pilot program was a project between Freddie, who's on the call this evening, and Alex, who is not on the call, but she participated in last year's program. They were partnered with our West Bayfront, and our West Bayfront identified a goal of activating a vacant lot next to the mini mart on West 4th Street that's owned by the Bayfront NATO and the MLK Center. This is located next to a food market as well as a restaurant within that food market. It has a pretty rundown fence around it, some old shrubbery, but more than anything, it just seemed to collect a lot of trash, and nobody was really using it in an intentional manner. So Freddie and Alex started working very closely with our West Bayfront to think about how that lot could be activated. When the pandemic started, they also reached out to neighborhood residents to figure out how people were doing during the preliminary months of the pandemic and see what their feelings were, what their thoughts were, both in the present moment in 2020, but also about the past and future of the neighborhood that they all reside in. And through that, Freddie and Alex wound up having interview sessions with 50 neighborhood residents, and they would record those interviews while doing live sketches of the residents. Those sketches were then entered into a CAD machine or a router machine, CNC, and they were used to create public art of the faces of the neighborhood. Likewise, some of the excerpts from their interviews made their way into pieces of public art as well. So a new fence was installed around the vacant lot. 50 portraits went up. The fence was painted very colorfully with a lot of positive aspirations and community sentiments. And then new landscaping was installed and new seating was installed so that now there's outside seating for that resident or for that restaurant that's in that mini mart. So that's one example of the 7 projects that occurred last year. Through getting both interim as well as final reports from the artists, we learned a lot about ways that we can better improve the program. Specifically, I think providing some more direction and constraints around the projects, and then also providing more training, more in-depth training on community engaged arts practices and processes. So we took that feedback to heart and we used it in shaping this year's program. Again, the funding was provided by Erie Insurance and the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. And we looked at some of the other objectives that were going on throughout the city of Erie and specifically the urban core. And one of the objectives in Erie Refocused, which is the city of Erie's master plan, is to reinforce the pedestrian scale of Erie. One of the challenges I think that's presented in that work is that though we have a pedestrian scale, we don't necessarily have a culture of pedestrian use. Typically, the automobile is kind of the king in Erie, and we knew that there was a lot of tension between automobile drivers and cyclists and automobile drivers and pedestrians. Likewise, we wanted to take into consideration all modes of mobility, not just biking, not just walking, not just vehicular traffic, but also public transportation and those individuals that use mobility assistance devices. This also looks at the Mayor Schember's priorities of creating a world-class bayfront and downtown. I think that in order to accomplish that, we also have to focus on world-class neighborhoods, and our neighborhoods feed into our downtown. Years ago, the city of Erie started on the active transportation plan, which really focuses on addressing a lot of these issues that we stated. And it seemed like this was a really good opportunity to leverage the creative abilities of artists to accomplish the objective of the Active Erie Plan and really assist the city of Erie through their Department of Planning, their Department of Traffic Engineering, and their Department of Public Works to have artists work very closely with municipal departments. So we developed an RFQ for the 2021 program, which I'm sharing on my screen right now. You can find this on erieartsandculture.org/CWC for creating with community, and it'll take you to this page. This year's program provides paid opportunities for 12 artists in our community. They will be paired together in teams of 2, and each participating artist will receive a $5,500 stipend for their participation in this program. Likewise, each team will receive a materials and supplies budget of at least $2,250. There may be some additional resources that we can leverage to provide additional support for materials and supplies. Here are some images from last year's sessions. So community input and community feedback is really important to any community engaged art project. The photo that you see here was a community listening session conducted by Simone and Michael. They were 2 of the artists that participated in last year's program. They are in the middle of their project and will resume it come spring/summer. They were paired with the Sisters of St. Joseph's Neighborhood Network and are specifically working to activate a portion of Parade Street from 18th to 26th. Working with businesses that are along that corridor, as well as the residents that live in the housing that has been built by developer Donnie Crenshaw, to really figure out what do they want and need and aspire to in that stretch of Parade Street. Here's some additional photos from those community listening sessions, because it's really important that community input drives the work that we do with these projects. This project was done with Serve Erie by Marquise and Lourdes, and they had assistance with another artist, AJ, and they looked at activating what was previously a vacant lot along East 7th Street that Serve Erie redeveloped into Heritage Park. The problem is that nobody was really utilizing the park. So the artists worked to activate that park, make some visual improvements to the park, provide some family-friendly programming within the park. They also took care of the community gardens in the park and helped other neighbors with cutting down on litter in the neighborhood, keeping up with yards and other things. Here's some photos of Alex and Freddie's project and the public art project that I previously talked about, some of their process shots. Trying to see if we can get to a final shot of the, I guess not, but if you go over to 4th between Cherry and Walnut, you can see this massive fence, and it's called We the People, and it's now referred to as People's Park. So this is the section where we start to talk about the project itself and some of its goals, as well as some of the scope that we want to focus on with this project. So some of the feedback that we received from artists last year is that they would really benefit from additional direction and perhaps some parameters on acceptable types of projects. So working with the City of Erie and other stakeholders to identify objectives of this year's project, we are focused on a specific section of 19th Street that runs between Cherry Street and Parade Street. We have Parade Street on here, but it might actually extend all the way over to the Bayfront. This section of East and West 19th Street could use some improvements to its visual landscape. It could use some wayfinding because there's a section of it that breaks up a little bit due to north-south running streets that intersect with it. But we really want to focus on East and West 19th Street in particular. This is an area that falls into the service footprint of the Sisters of St. Joseph's neighborhood network. When it comes to the types of projects we want to see artists develop and implement and then measure, we're looking for projects that improve the visual landscape. So that can be done through public art. We are looking for projects that improve either safety or perception of safety. We know that this stretch of Erie's urban core has had some issues either with safety or narratives that have created perceptions that the area is unsafe. We could focus on wayfinding. So how is signage installed that allows folks to know that they are on a bike path or pedestrian path and what destinations they could potentially approach through that path. Driver education and sharing the road. As I mentioned, there's a lot of conflict that exists between drivers and cyclists. In Pennsylvania, there are some specific rules around sharing the road with cyclists. As a person that rides my bike myself, I always ride on the road, as is my right in the state of Pennsylvania. However, I constantly have cars that hug really close to me and don't give me the necessary clearance that they're supposed to. I also have individuals yell things out the window about how I should be on the sidewalk, etc. So driver education is really important. We also want to encourage and promote the health benefits of walking or cycling. You know, our community unfortunately does have a lot of health and wellness issues, and there are health and wellness benefits to both walking and cycling, and these projects could promote those benefits. I also think that we don't have it here, but one of the other things I think we could look at is how do we promote the fact that we're a four-season city? You know, obviously we had a lot of snowfall the last couple of days, and when that tends to happen, I think people think less of walking outside. and definitely cycling outside. But I know we got Antonio on the call tonight who has a fat bike and has rode through the city streets in the wintertime. I also know we have other folks on the call that are avid walkers, even in the wintertime. So promoting the fact that these activities can occur during all four seasons that we experience here in Erie, Pennsylvania. Again, addressing points of conflict between drivers and this time pedestrians. I think a lot of this tends to occur at crosswalks, intersections, and areas where maybe sidewalks do not allow for pedestrian access to the way that we think they should. Or if someone's on a mobility assistance device and they're not able to access a sidewalk because it's broken up, there's tree roots coming through it, etc. And then lastly, ADA accessibility. There's a lot of development that is occurring in Erie right now, and not all of that development is following best practices and guidelines as published by the ADA regulations. So those are really the scope of projects that we're looking at artists to address through their projects. Each artist group will be responsible for developing a residency plan, and those residency plans should be informed through the community engagement process. One of the things that we also heard from artists last year was that they wanted additional training. So this year we have commissioned artist Tom Ferraro to provide training to all of the artists who are selected for this project. Tom Ferraro is probably the artist in our community that has the single most experience doing community engaged public art projects. And he has a wealth of experience that he's learned through his tenure as a rostered teaching artist with Erie Arts and Culture. And he's attended training outside of the Erie area and has presented on this topic outside of the Erie area. So we've secured Tom to provide 3 sessions of training for all of the artists that participate in the program this year. In addition to those 3 sessions of training, Tom will work one-on-one with the artist teams throughout the duration of their project. He will also work with each artist team to complete an interim report, followed by a final report at the end of the project. So Tom is going to be a huge asset to not only Erie Arts and Culture in the city of Erie, but all of the artists that participate in this program. Because the stipend is great, but really we're looking to invest in artists that have an interest in community engaged practices. And we really want to make sure that we're building the capacity of artists who plan to pursue similar types of projects after this. Last year, we saw a number of artists that participated in the program go on to apply to become rostered teaching artists with Erie Arts and Culture so that they can continue upon these types of artistic and community engaged pursuits. And I think that's another thing to really highlight in last year's program is first, the roster of artists that participated in last year's program were incredibly diverse, but also I'd say that for probably 80% of the artists that participated in the program, it was their first time receiving a paid or applying to and receiving a paid opportunity from Erie Arts and Culture. And then to see those artists continue to apply for opportunities with our agency, but then also use this as a starting point to apply for funding for other opportunities. We have Esther Ortiz on the call this evening. She participated in Creating with Community last year, and then she went on to get a grant from the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts for a folk and traditional arts apprenticeship grant. And then also she went on to successfully apply for an artist entrepreneur grant through the Erie County Redevelopment Authority. And this is the type of capacity building that we really want to see occur through these types of projects. How are these projects preparing you for the next opportunity that you can say yes to and help you achieve your goals as an artist living and working in Erie, Pennsylvania? As I mentioned, the budget includes $5,500 for each artist, as well as a stipend for materials of $2,500. Already talked about the training. So our deadline to apply is January 22nd. We hope to let artists know who was selected at the start of February so that we can start the process of training and project design uh, no later than March. The application process, I think, is pretty accessible. It's going to start with a letter of interest, also known as an LOI. And within your letter of interest, we're really looking at having you as an artist answer three questions. Why are you interested in a neighborhood residency? What are some previous projects, if any, that you've completed that are relatable to this opportunity? And what is your methodology, if you have one, for working with community? So there's two questions there that we specifically say, if any, and if you have one. Please do not feel like if you haven't done this type of project that you will not be considered for this project. That's not the case. We know that we meet artists where they're at, and for many artists, this will be the first time they're doing this type of work. So if you don't have applicable previous experience, that's a-okay. But we really do want to know, why are you interested in this? If you say, I'm interested in this opportunity because there's a $5,500 stipend, chances are you're going to score relatively low amongst the review panel, because that doesn't feel very authentic. But if you are authentic in your response and show a sincere interest in this type of arts-based community development, then I think you'll do quite well. We're also looking for an artist bio. With your artist bio, we recommend it be 1 to 2 paragraphs in length. It's typically written in the third person, so I wouldn't say I or me. I'd say Patrick Fisher, etc. He, his, etc. And it really focuses on the main aspects as it relates to you as an artist. If you have a degree in the arts, you could talk about that. So like if I was doing my own bio, I'd say Patrick Fisher lives and work in Erie, Pennsylvania, and has spent a majority of his life living in northwestern Pennsylvania. He received his Bachelor's of Science degree from Penn State Behrend in 2008, yada, yada, yada. If you're an artist, you could talk about, I'm going to use Antonio Howard because I know he's on the call this evening. Antonio Howard is a self-taught artist, or as Antonio says, a shelf-taught artist living in Erie County, Pennsylvania. Since 2018, he has been honing his skill as both a studio artist as well as a muralist. In 2020, Antonio completed murals for Erie Arts and Culture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's really not looking at a lot of fluff. I think sometimes when artists write bio, they feel like they want a lot of flowery language included in it. And that's really not what is necessary. An effective bio is brief and it's concise, and it gives you a full understanding of who the artist is. We're also looking for a CV. Now, I started, my very first job was at Putt Miniature Golf in Meadville, Pennsylvania, followed by Giant Eagle. The CV I put together today, I'm not going to include any of that on there. As an artist, what you should include are those work-related experiences specific to your artistic discipline. So as an artist, you could talk about, if you have a formal education, even if you don't have a formal education, if you participated in an apprenticeship, or if you have a mentor, you can talk about that on your CV and in your bio. If you have solo or group exhibitions or performances, you can include that in your CV. If you have been published, you can include that in your CV. And we actually have a sample bio and CV on our website that we will link to. We'll email everybody the links to those so you can take a look at what are effective bios, what are effective CVs, so that you can really hone in on that, or if you've never done that before, feel confident in the work. Lastly, we look at 5 to 7 work samples and their descriptions. So if you've done community engaged art projects, it would be best that those 5 to 7 work samples reflect that type of work. And then in your descriptions, you can provide, anywhere from a couple sentences to a paragraph or two describing the work that's being showcased. If you've never done this type of project, then you should really focus on 5 to 7 images or videos that best represent your abilities as an artist. So if you are a dancer, you can include any links to videos of your performances. If you're a visual artist, you can include images of some of your work that you feel best represents you. If you're a literary artist, you could include probably not full works, but perhaps excerpts from works that you've written, etc. But you should really feel confident in how those 5 to 7 pieces represent you as an artist and will position you as a strong candidate for this project. Uh, Anytime you're submitting a work sample, always focus on it being a high quality image, high definition video, good resolution audio, etc. And I'm going to go back to that capacity building aspect for a little bit. This is one example of a community engaged project, but there are platforms such as Cafe and others that post, and even if you look at the Pittsburgh Arts Council, they often post a lot of public art opportunities. Typically, anytime you respond to a public art opportunity as an artist or a residency or a fellowship, whether it's in our community or outside of our community, the administrator of that program is going to ask for some things. They're going to ask for a letter of interest or intent. They're going to ask for an artist bio. They're going to ask for a CV. They're going to ask for work samples and descriptions. Sometimes they might ask for references. If you're applying for public art projects, they'll often ask in your work samples for you to include budgets of those past projects that you worked on. So if you're applying for a $250,000 commission for a sculpture, they're going to want to see similarly what are projects that you have done that are 6-figure in value. So we're not just trying to put you through the ringer as it relates to requesting these types of things as part of our application process. We're trying to equip our review committee with the information necessary for them to score each application. But we're also trying to prepare you for applying to future opportunities, whether they are within our community or outside of our community. And if any of you have any questions when it comes to responding to these things, don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to be available and a resource. My email address is on this application. It's right here. You can reach out to me and say, hey, I need assistance crafting a bio, or I need assistance writing my CV, or I have 12 images and I'm trying to figure out what 5 or 7 I should select for my work samples. I'm more than happy to meet with you virtually and go through that process with you. So we do use a third-party platform called Submittable for all of our application processes. So you're going to click here to apply. It's going to show you the complete guidelines, which you just saw on our previous page. Then you need to create an account. Or if you have applied for a grant through Erie Arts and Culture, a fellowship through Erie Arts and Culture, or other past projects through Erie Arts and Culture, chances are you already have an account and you just need to sign in. But once you either sign in or have an account, you'll then have the full application. And it's a application where you type fields in. So this isn't something that you print out and handwrite and then scan or mail to us. You fill it all out directly through Submittable. Once it's submitted, I get an email saying, Alex Staley just submitted his application to Creating with Community. That way, if you have any questions about did my application go through, you can follow up with me and I can confirm with you, yes, we received this. Submittable is also how our panel reviews the application for scoring. So again, this can all be found at erieartsandculture.org/CWC for Creating with Community. The deadline to apply is January 22nd, and we're trying to stick with that deadline. I think that if you go into Submittable and take a look at the application, it's something that you should be able to complete between now and the 22nd. However, if for some reason you have any issues and you need to request an extension, please reach out to me sooner rather than later. But chances are the only extension that we would be willing to offer would be, 24 to 48 hours. We're not going to give you another week on it because we really want to get our committee together around the 27th to start reviewing applications. I did have some folks email me today in like the Pittsburgh region asking if they could participate in this program as a resident of Western Pennsylvania. Our requirements for this project is that you are 18 years of age or older and that you are a resident of Erie County. That being said, we are going to give preference to those artists who live in the city of Erie and specifically live in the neighborhoods that we are implementing this project. Now, that can't guarantee necessarily that we will have folks from the neighborhood that apply to this project, but those artists are who get preference uh, based off of the fact that they live in the communities we are trying to engage. They represent the communities we're trying to serve. And I think that that's overall just best practices. So that's all I have about the opportunity itself and the application process. For those of you that applied to the project last year and were selected, you are eligible to reapply this year because again, we have training. It's a whole new project and we are looking to build capacity by reinvesting in folks. Those individuals that applied last year and weren't selected for last year, we encourage you to apply again this year. But with all of that said, are there any questions before we move into what is the active transportation plan, which will be presented by the city of Erie? If you have a question, please unmute yourself to ask it.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So in the application, it says work samples, images, the recommended size for images is 1,240 by 1,240 pixels. What the hell does that mean, man? Like, I take pictures, they seem to be clear. I think that they're high resolution. I've gone on YouTube to try to figure this out, and they're not high resolution. So I'm like,
So yeah, so there's two types of resolution. I wish Jade was still on the call, but I think she may have jumped off. Jade would be better equipped to answer this. But there's two types of resolution. One is for web viewing, and the other is for printing and publication. So we just finished our fourth quarter impact report today. The resolution that the report is uploaded online is high resolution, but it's still a lesser resolution than what will go to the printers. So if you're taking a picture, Antonio, with a cell phone, chances are that is already high resolution and it's an adequate resolution to meet the recommendation of the application.
mm-hmm.
What we wouldn't look for is, I don't know about you, but sometimes I have a photo, it's saved on my computer. I didn't really pay much attention to how I archived it. I have a hard time finding it, but I knew I maybe uploaded it to Instagram. So then I take a screen grab of something off of Instagram, or maybe I find it through a Google search and I save it, but it's only a thumbnail. And that is when you upload that screen grab or that thumbnail, it's typically such a small resolution that it wouldn't appropriately show your work. But if you're taking a photo with a cell phone or someone took a photo with a camera, it's going to be in an adequate resolution.
If the only photo I have is off a screen grab, is there any way to change that to be a high resolution photo?
It all depends. What I would ask you to do, Antonio, is if you could email that question specifically to Jade and attach the photo that you have.
Cool.
I suspect that if it can be resized, she can not only instruct you on how she resizes it, But if for some reason it's done through a program that you don't have, she could resize it for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? I'm going to ask one more time before
I got
we.
another question.
Yes, sir.
All right, so timelines. So let's say I'm chosen as one of the artists, but I got a 9 to 5. Like, how do I work this residency into my 9 to 5?
Yeah, so while I think that the stipend we're providing artists is a nice stipend, by no means is it enough to expect you to do this as a 9 to 5, 40 hours a week, right? It's really up to you and your co-artist to work together to build a schedule around your project. We have the duration of projects as the design process starting in March 22nd, and we want projects to be complete by August 27th, with final reports due September 17th. Now, even though that is a span of what, is that 5 months, if I'm not mistaken? By no means are we expecting every project to take 5 months in length, nor are we expecting you to work on this every day or every week throughout that 5 months. You know, some artists might start their project right there at that March 22nd time period, do all of their planning, do all their community engagement, get everything situated, start to implement the project, and then be complete in the next 2 months. That's okay. Other artists might wait till the latter portion of that time to complete it. Others might work sporadically on it throughout that 5 month duration. It's really driven by the project, both of you as artists, and the communities that you're working with. But again, you know, if this is something that you do on the evenings, do on the weekends, that's a-okay. I think practically every artist that we worked with last year, except for a couple, had other employment obligations. Either they were self-employed and they had things that they had to tend to through that self-employment, or they worked for an employer. Answer your question, Antonio?
Yes.
It's no different than the mural project you did for the Mana Sunoco. You know, you went out there on evenings, you went out there on weekends, and you knocked it out in, you know, a month and a half. Very similar process. But we would ask that you, as part of your project design, do build a schedule. And Tom will help artists with that. You know, with our teaching artists, rostered teaching artists, every residency project they do requires a schedule. It requires a plan. So a lot of what Tom is going to be teaching the artists selected for this project is building upon or teaching those same things that we require for our rostered teaching artists, in hopes that, again, artists that participate in this might consider becoming a rostered teaching artist with the state and with Erie Arts and Culture. Any other questions? One question that I'm surprised wasn't asked, but has been asked to me privately, so I felt I should answer it now. We're not looking for you to come to the table with a partner already. Ideally, we will pair artists together based off of their applications, based off of whether or not, you know, they've worked together, because ideally we want to see interdisciplinary artists paired together. You know, with Freddie's project, Freddie is a woodworker, Alex is a printmaker. And I think that if you looked at their project, it was a real perfect marriage of their two artistic disciplines. So ideally, we would be pairing artists together in a manner that is interdisciplinary. So last year we had a photographer with a dancer and choreographer. We had a piñata artist with a sculptor. We had a printmaker and a wood carver. We had a woodworker and a herbalist and urban farmer. We had a thespian and a photographer. So again, we're really looking at how can you be paired together in a way that you maybe have not previously collaborated in order to be pushed outside of your comfort zone and think about your role as an artist and your abilities as an artist in a new perspective. All right, I'm going to ask one last time before I hand it over to Kathy with the City of Erie. Do we have any other questions?
Patrick.
Yes, Freddie.
Hey, Patrick. I think you already answered my question that I was thinking to make is that as I had been one of the artists last year, I can apply still for this year. That was one. Good to know.
Yep, that's correct.
Got another question.
Yes, Antonio.
What happens if our residency is underway and like COVID spikes again, right? And some of us have a reluctance being around community. What happens? Do we forfeit our residency or the work that we've already put in? Do we get half the stipend? Do we have to give it back? The half that, what happens logistically?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And if you recall when I had the page pulled up, I had mentioned that Simone and Michael were still in the process of their residency. It's because it's been put on hold because of those similar types of concerns. So we went back to our funder and requested an extension on our report, because the reason we request a report from each of the participating artists is because our funders request a report from us. They want to know, how did you use our money? What was the impact of it? How many people were served? What were the outcomes that were achieved? Because inevitably they're looking at, was it a good decision to give Erie Arts and Culture and these artists the money as opposed to giving it to any other number of charitable causes and needs that exist within our community, right? So it's really important that we take these projects and these reports very seriously. But in the circumstance with our artists this year, because of the public health pandemic, we requested, let us know as soon as you feel, a sense of discomfort in continuing forward with your project, so that we can request the appropriate and necessary extensions from our funders so that we can provide each artist with those. So Antonio, I think any good plan always has a plan B. So I would encourage, as artists are doing their residency plan A is, in a perfect world where we're able to go back to in-person engagements, this is what we propose. But plan B is, if we're not able to have in-person engagements, this is what we propose. And if for some reason plan C is, as an artist, I am immune compromised, or I have a loved one that's immune compromised, or from any other number of reasons you don't feel comfortable engaging during a public health pandemic, plan C could be requesting an extension. But we really would not ask for, the last thing we would want to do is say, you didn't fulfill the obligations of this project and what you agreed to in your MOU, your Memorandum of Understanding, therefore we need to request that funding back. Because we also recognize that for many of the artists, getting $5,500, that's pretty quickly going to go towards living expenses, bills, investing in your personal practice as an artist. And you might not just have $5,500 sitting in your bank account that you could afford to pay back to Erie Arts and Culture. I know that if my employer asked me to pay back $5,500 right now, I couldn't do it. And if I couldn't do it, I'm not going to put that expectation onto the artists that participate in this program. One thing that is important to say is that you will not be operating as an employee of Erie Arts and Culture. Therefore, we do not take taxes out on the funds that we provide you. However, this is considered earned income. Therefore, at the end of the year from Erie Arts and Culture, you will get a 1099, and the government does expect you to pay taxes on this. So it is important that when you get this money from Erie Arts and Culture, the stipend specifically, not the materials and supplies budget, but the stipend specifically, that you set aside funds in an account so that you can pay taxes on those funds come tax season. All right. I am now going to hand it over to Kathy Rosdick. Kathy is the Director of Planning with the City of Erie, and she is going to talk more about the active transportation plan. We also have Leanne with the City of Erie, who is the traffic engineer. I'm not sure if Leanne plans on presenting anything this evening, but if you have any questions for me as you go about reviewing the opportunity and reviewing the application, please don't hesitate to reach out. My email address is patrick@erieartsandculture.org. It's included on the Creating with Community page. It's also included in the submittable page. Without any further ado, Kathy, it's all you.
Thanks, Patrick. I texted Leanne to just ask her if I get anything wrong, she has to chime in. So I think that is when she'll interject herself if I say something that is completely wrong, because this is where I make our public works staff nervous, is when we decide to do stuff like this. So you're venturing, those who decide to apply, you're venturing into an area that I can assure you the City of Erie's never been in, but we're excited to try this. I mean, for the past couple of years, I'm the planning director with the city. I've been with the cities for 3 years now. So we started this project in October of 2019. It takes that long to do citywide plans, such as an active transportation plan. But we felt we really needed to do something along those lines. It was about the same time that we were talking with Patrick, and he was talking about this idea of artists in residence, and wouldn't it be nice if we somehow incorporated artists working directly with the city on problem solving and issues that come up. And it finally came to fruition that we felt like this was the project where we could test that out. So your stakeholders in this will not only be the residents who live within the City of Erie, the people who bike and walk in the city, but it's going to be the city staff. It's going to be the guys and gals who are out there driving the trucks, paving the streets, getting the complaints about sidewalks and police. We can get you in front of in the right way, in front of police who are having to deal with traffic issues. So we really want this to be a very collaborative effort on solving some of the ideas or solving some of the problems and moving forward with the recommendations of the active Erie plan. And just to give you a little background of how we got, and then I'll show you the plan, and it's available right now on the Active Erie website. But how we got to where we're at today is the city, alongside consultants that we hired, we created a steering committee that's very broad. It was about 15 or 16 different agencies, organizations, interest groups sat with us. Erie Arts and Culture was one of them, as an example. The school district was another, PennDOT, the Transit Authority, but we also had representatives from the Disabilities Action Team with the Mayor's Action Team, Multicultural Resource Center to try to get some of the new Americans and refugees involved in the planning. And yeah, I'll share that. I'll share that, Kelly. So we had a very broad steering committee, and our plan was to go out into the community like we've done so many times and meet with everyone and go to festivals and get input and go door to door. And then COVID hit. And so none of that was possible. So we went mostly online for surveys and input, which is less than optimal. I'll give you that. Hopefully this process and this opportunity we'll have an opportunity for you to go back out in the community and specifically work with residents on solving issues, specifically work with staff on solving issues and implementing the Erie or Active Erie plan. But so we tried to make do with what we had available. We did, and it was actually something that that Patrick had shared. We did a mobile workshop. So we took the plan to the people, and we stopped at 6 different spots. We rode 15 miles that day. I'm still recovering from that because I'm not a biker, I'm a runner. And we live streamed it all. It rained, it was cold. We stopped and had lunch at New York Lunch on East Avenue. We talked to people in the park. We were at Three Sisters Park in Little Italy. So we really tried to get out as much as possible. And that was a nice experience for all of us. And it was also the people who were on the bike. There was about 20 of us. We were able to see the system as it is today and the challenges and how many times we were almost hit by drivers and yelled at. And so we were able to kind of experience a little bit what it's like to get to bike around the city. Oh, Patrick already shared the website. So I will hopefully share my screen. I want to just walk you through the plan. And this plan, you just see a bunch of lines, right? This plan identified the citywide what we call low traffic stress corridors. So those streets that are primarily easy to bike on now. There's not a lot of work that needs to be done to them, but they basically get people from point A to point B, and there's not a lot of traffic. And the city of Erie has a lot of those. So what this shows you is everything in green. Try to orient yourself. You can see the water to the top of the page, and then 38th Street is the bottom magenta. Everything in green is what we call our primary low stress corridors, low traffic stress. And in those situations, this is where it's wayfinding, directional signage. There might be some pinch points that are identified that aren't specifically addressed here. In the magenta or the pink lines, those are what we considered aspirational. So there's about 4 or 5 of those that would require much more funding to do, resources, bridges, major redesign of the road, moving curbs. So those are, and then the yellow, as you can see, the yellow is local access to schools, to parks. So how do you get people off the grid and into these areas? So that's essentially what we're focusing on, is that design throughout the city. And then there's some, you can see the red that kind of outlines the city here. That's the Bayfront Trail that exists today. And then the thought was try to find as many east-west routes that are get you from the one end of the city to the other as much as possible without too many interruptions. So that's where you see these 5 or so. 38th Street is the one that's going to cost a little bit more to do because there's so much going on. 19th Street, well, that was the corridor that was part of you can see 19th, 21st Street between Cherry and Parade. That was the corridor that we included in our workshop. And so it's a really interesting corridor, not only because of the road width. So there's a lot to play with. I like when we have lots of right of way to play with. I call it like a blank canvas. There is some there because there used to be a railroad that ran along on the street, and that's been removed. So you got this really wide road, but it has some really neat things happening. It touches, like Patrick said, you're in the Sisters of St. Joseph, Little Italy area. They have 3 Sisters Parks. They have their community gardens. They have their urban ag. They have a bike share program, if you're not familiar with it. And as you move east, you've got an arts collaborative building that's occurring. You get a little bit further past State Street, east of State, and you've got Snoop's or Spoon's basketball court is there. You're backing right up against the City of Erie's garage and their laydown yard. We have talked about, there's a lot of stuff that the city has between light poles and manholes and different pipes. And we thought if someone's interested in utilizing some of that equipment in your work, we can talk about that. We can figure out ways of doing that. But we like that 19th Street because it really touches on a lot of things that we think are really interesting and to tie into. So just to give you a little bit more about the plan. So the plan is then you break it down and you get into what these corridors from an engineering standpoint could look like. And I'll get you to the 19th Street so we can talk about, just so you can just orient yourself to what the plan. So this is, more a policy document and an engineering document too. So here you have 19th Street. It's outlined in this black. It's green because it's a low stress, so there's not a lot of improvements. But then you get into, here's what's recommended in the existing road right of way. So when the city goes to pave it, or if the city has some funding, there's striping. Here's how you would. It doesn't really talk about what does signage look like and things like that. So we feel like there's a lot of room to kind of play with this outline. But that's essentially what it does. So this is an example of the sort of built environment recommendations. There's also policy recommendations in this. And so policy is how do you program sidewalk improvements, complete streets? How do you make sure that every street you look at is safe and accessible to everyone who wants to use it? Driver education is, we don't really talk about it in the plan, but we were out there and we were hit. I thought the mayor was going to die 7 times because he's not very good on a bike. And there were lots of people who nearly hit him. And so this whole idea of driver education is really spoke to us. And we just thought that there's a lot of different opportunities in bringing artists to the table, particularly not just working with the community, because I think artists can do that in a really compelling way, but work with city staff too, because I think there's a lot of people who are on these streets for different reasons all day long and have ideas themselves, but they're not typically asked to the table, how do we creatively solve this? It's pretty standard. They're out there paving, they're out there milling up the road, but they're never asked, hey, what would you do if you could fix this, or what do you see while you're out? So I think there's kind of an interesting intersection that can happen here. From our standpoint, the Erie Arts and Culture is really working with the city to implement this plan. And as part of that, the artists will engage the community specifically along this corridor and staff. And like I said, we might have some access to some of our equipment and certainly can work with you specifically if you need assistance for installations, particularly you need a pad paved, things like that. But all the designs that are actually within the right of way will have to get approval by the city. So that's why we wanted to make sure you work with the city early and often and have a good line of communication, because what we don't want to be is the dream killer, is you to get all the way to the finish line and then the city to see something that says, well, our regulations don't allow us to do that. We have some challenges, but actually work with some interesting creative solutions so we can get something that meets the needs of our community, but also sort of stays within the guidelines that we have to meet. And that's where, Leanne, I think everyone's excited about this opportunity, but wants to make sure that everything's done correctly and the city's not sued. But we wouldn't be here if we didn't want to give it a shot. But that's essentially what this is. I'm glad they already shared the link for you. Feel free to look at it. It does talk about the demographics of the city and where the most need is. We anticipate, though, that even though you're looking specifically at 19th Street, your projects will be translatable throughout the network. So what works on 19th can work on 6th, can work on 10th. So we anticipate that to be an outcome of this as well. So I think that's about all I wanted to say. We're looking forward. Hopefully everyone gets excited about this, sees opportunities, and wants to apply for it. So questions for me? I don't know how I can stop sharing. There we go.
Do we have any questions for Kathy or the City of Erie, or any other questions about the project and initiative that may have arisen after Kathy's presentation? All right. If there are no other questions, I will be respectful of everybody's time and let you go. But if you have questions for myself, again, my email is patrick@erieartsandculture.org. If you have any questions for the city, I'd be happy to facilitate those to Kathy or Leanne on your behalf. But I really encourage you to not wait until the 22nd to start the application. I'd really encourage you all to jump into it now. And if you have any questions, get those answered as soon as possible. But thanks for your interest in participating this evening, everybody. Have a good evening.